Ja, auch von mir herzlich willkommen im Proberaum oder einen der vielen Proberäume für Anti-Algorithmen und in diesem Fall vor allen Dingen für Orientierung im 21. Jahrhundert im digitalen Zeitalter. Das ist der zweite Teil unseres Podiums 4. Wir hatten heute schon den ersten Teil, da war es journalistisch und theoretisch. Heute wollen wir die Künste mit in die Mitte führen, theoretisch gerahmt. Nach einer kleinen Einleitung werden wir mit Bernd Lerner und Cotten, zwei Autoren bzw. eine Autorin, hier auf der Bühne haben, die Stücke vortragen werden. Das Ganze wird dann nochmal umrahmt oder abgeschlossen mit einem Vortrag vom Kunstwissenschaftler Philipp Ekardt. Ja, um den Bogen nochmal zu schlagen, zum ersten Teil würde ich gerne nochmal einen Begriff oder vielmehr eine Idee aufgreifen, Stichwort Leibniz, Monadologie, beziehungsweise der Begriff der Konstellation. Also es geht im Folgenden und vielleicht auch später auf verschiedene Art und Weise eigentlich um den Wissensanspruch der Künste und ihre Rolle als Bewahrer und Vermittler menschlicher Erfahrung. Ja, also auf der einen Seite die Autobahnstrategie der Algorithmenlogik, wenn Sie so wollen, und auf der anderen Seite all die vernachlässigten Wald- und Schleichwege menschlicher Erfahrung. Es geht um das numerische Alphabet des Silicon Valley auf der höchsten Abstraktionsstufe auf der einen Seite und um die Alphabete der Menschheitsgeschichte. Es lässt sich ja, wie wir das, glaube ich, heute an diesem Tag auch schon sehen konnten, eine gewisse Evolution der Kommunikationsformen ablesen, also begonnen mit der Mündlichkeit über die Schriftlichkeit bis jetzt zur Digitalisierung. Und das Phänomen ist ja, dass all das gleichzeitig heute existiert. Es stellt sich dabei auch grundsätzlich die Frage, wie Philosophie aussehen kann, was die Aufgaben von Philosophie sind im digitalen Zeitalter. Denn ich glaube, es kann ihr nicht mehr darum gehen, nach ewigen Wahrheiten zu suchen, sondern wir brauchen sie und ihre Sorgfalt, um in einem Chaos der Information und Desinformation und Falschinformation uns zurechtzufinden. Es geht um so typisch kantische Fragen wie, was kann ich wissen, was muss ich wissen, wem kann ich vertrauen, was schützt mich? Und für so eine Philosophie der Orientierung können wir zum Beispiel bei Walter Benjamin oder Theodor Adorno oder sogar einem gewissen Alexander Kluge, die können wir zu Rate ziehen. Und deshalb, weil sie alle nach der Idee der Konstellation arbeiten, als einem analytischen und übrigens zugleich ästhetischen Verfahren. In einem Brief über seine unvollendet gebliebene ästhetische Theorie schrieb Adorno, dass sich aufgrund seiner Theoreme, aufgrund seiner Ideen und Ideen sich Konsequenzen für die Form aufgedrängt haben. Also die Ideen sprengten irgendwann seiner Meinung nach die Form einer Kausalkette. Es ist nämlich so, dass es für ihn philosophisch nichts Erstes geben konnte. Also, und dementsprechend konnte es auch keinen hierarchischen Aufbau in der Entfaltung seiner Theorie geben. Mit anderen Worten, er wählte ästhetische Mittel des Ausdrucks, nämlich versuchte er so montagehaft, konzentrisch zu arbeiten, ja zu komponieren, wenn Sie so wollen. Ihm ging für die kritische Theorie noch jemand voraus, das ist Walter Benjamin, vorakademischer kritischer Theoretiker sozusagen, der es auch nicht so leicht hatte mit dem Akademischen der Frankfurter Schule. Er schrieb unter anderem, die Ideen sind ewige Konstellationen und indem die Elemente als Punkte in derartigen Konstellationen erfasst werden, sind die Phänomene aufgeteilt und gerettet zugleich. Menschen lassen sich nicht verallgemeinern, könnte man dazu sagen, zusammenfassend. Wir sind alle besonders und nur darin sind wir gleich. Während der Algorithmus objektiviert und damit ausgrenzt und sozusagen existenzielle Zusammenhänge auch verdeckt, weist die Konstellation immer auf ein Außerdem hin. Eines wirft Licht aufs andere, wie Adorno sagt. Seine Auseinandersetzung mit der Idee konfigurativer Gestaltung erleben wir im Werk Alexander Kluges in crossmedialer Verwirklichung, die darüber hinaus, wie Sie das heute selbst wahrnehmen können, Öffentlichkeit schafft. Also all seine Bücher, seine Filme, TV, was jetzt leider zu Ende gegangen ist, Internet, Ausstellungen, Museenarbeit, Opernarbeiten mit Schlingensief oder was wir heute im HKW erleben. Und hinsichtlich der kritischen Theorie ist das gewissermaßen eine Erweiterung des akademischen Alphabets um freiere Ausdrucksformen. Also die Einbeziehung der Kunst in den Erkenntnisprozess und in deren Vermittlung. Und die Vermittlung hat die Philosophie, würde ich meinen, eher weniger interessiert bislang. Auf diesen Erkenntnisweg wird nicht versucht, das zu Bezeichnende festzuzurren, festzuhalten, sondern es wird versucht, in seiner Eigenbewegung zu bewahren. Sie sehen da das Gegenmodell der Konstellation. Es stammt aus dem Passagenwerk Benjamins, findet sich im Appendix. Sie sehen dort eine Eisenbrücke aus dem 19. Jahrhundert, die Planetenbrücke. Ist natürlich hochgradig unrealistisch. Durch die Eigenbewegung, Rotation der Planeten und auch die Planetenumlaufbahn würde diese Brücke im Nu zerbrechen, beziehungsweise könnte man sie ja nicht mal errichten. So, und diese gravitative Spannung, die man da durchaus in dem Bild auch wahrnehmen kann, der konstellativen Darstellungsform, kann durch ihre Wiedergabe von all diesen Anziehungs- und Abstoßungsverhältnissen das Lebendige erhalten und auf Zusammenhänge, auch zeitlich getrennte Zusammenhänge, aufmerksam machen. Es geht darum, die Phänomene oder dass die Phänomene ihr Eigenleben bewahren und dass sie nicht instrumentalisiert werden. Alexander Kluge reiht sich hier also in diese Reihe ein. Die Realität, die ist ja nicht etwas rein Subjektives, was nur im individuellen Kopf stattfindet und auch nicht etwas schicksalhaft Objektives, was über uns steht, sondern Realität besteht aus subjektiv-objektiven Beziehungen. Das wäre jetzt im Sinne Kluges gesprochen, hoffe ich. Man sieht also, eine Analyse in Stufenform ist ungeeignet. Algorithmen kann man als objektive Gewalten beschreiben, die sich um das Subjektive nicht scheren, zumindest wenn sie es tun, dann eigentlich nur um die Fantasien und Bedürfnisse und Sehnsüchte zu okkupieren. Wir erleben das zum Beispiel, ja, wenn die Verwertungslogik bereits vor uns weiß, was wir wollen, Stichwort Kaufempfehlung. Kluge nennt sie deshalb, nicht ohne Grund, die neuen Sirenen. Während also die Algorithmen auf unsere Libido zielen, weiß die Kunst schon lange, dass diese nicht bei 1 und 0 und 0 und 1 steht, sondern irgendwo dazwischen, in den Zwischenräumen oszilliert. Weitere gute Nachrichten: Die Kunst glaubt an die minus 0. Und die Musik bleibt bei der Frage nach dem universalisierenden Kommunikationsmittel jedem ausgeklügelten Algorithmus letztendlich überlegen. Wir sehen, die Aufgabe von Gegenalgorithmen muss also sein, die Vervollständigung der Realität um das Subjektive. Er löst die Nachrichten von der menschlichen Gleichgültigkeit. Mittel, die diese Schule hier anwendet, die keine Schule ist: Narration, Musik, Montage, auch die Metapher, Verfremdungseffekte, um die Zeit anzuhalten. Aber auch Humor, Dada. Der Witz zerlegt die übermächtige Realität in Einzelteile. Auf diesen materialistischen Instinkt weist Friedrich Nietzsche hin. Und er weiß auch, das Interesse am Wahren hört auf, je weniger Lust es gewährt. Diese Lust ist das Poetische, diese Lust ist auch der Eros in der Wissenschaft. Wie schon eigentlich in der Alchemistenküche oder um 1800, wo wir erleben, dass Wissenschaft, Kunst, die verschiedenen Künste, das Kunsthandwerk und die Naturwissenschaften vor allen Dingen, dass das alles zusammenkommt und einen Wissensdurst ausdrückt, der sich gesellig in den Salons wiederfindet. Und dieser Wissensdurst ist auch immer ein Durst und die Lust nach dem anderen, nach dem Fremden oder nach dem Fremdwort und der Fremdsprache. Wir verbinden also hier wieder Information mit Narration und mit Vergnügen und Geselligkeit. Während die kalte Information bloß mitteilt, bevor die nächste Katastrophe auf den Rezipienten einschlägt, wird sich das Unglück, mit der theoretisch-kritischen Poesie seiner selbst bewusst. Und diese Reflexion, dieser Reflexionsmoment, der affiziert dann den Widerstand und den Antirealismus des Gefühls, um nochmal einen klugen Ausdruck zu benutzen, den Antirealismus des Gefühls gegen dieses Unglück, dass man etwas tun muss und auch tun kann. Die Kunst dehnt im Prinzip den Zeitpunkt der Breaking News auf, dehnt es zu einem Zeitraum, wenn Sie so wollen, auf, in dem es die historische Erfahrung mit einfließen lässt und auch gleichzeitig den Optativ, den Möglichkeitssinn, also die Suche nach glücklichen Auswegen. Schauerballaden mit glücklichem Ausgang. Die Kunst erzählt, und sie weiß, von der Intelligenz der Zellen in uns, die älter ist als die menschliche Ratio oder sein ach so stolzes Ich. Nach Adorno besitzt das Kunstwerk Schriftcharakter und Traumlogik. Der Wahrheitsanspruch der Kunst ist nicht begrifflicher Natur. Dass wir zum Beispiel de facto aus Sternenstaub gemacht sind, ist vollem poetischen Pathos und poetischer Aura, dass es nur Sinn macht, dass Wissenschaft und Kunst zusammen operieren, zusammenkommen und zusammen als Vermittler auftreten. Übrigens eine Beobachtung zum Schluss: Das Prinzip Konstellation in der Analyse und in der Darstellung entspricht auf der Produktionsebene dem Prinzip der Kooperation. Und dann wären wir schon beim nächsten Gast. Es ist nicht Stachel der Clown, der sich hier verkleidet hat. Es ist der erste Künstler, der erste Autor für heute Abend. Es ist Ben Lerner, mit dem Alexander Kluge schon mehrfach zusammengearbeitet hat. Das begann mich mit den Lichtenberg-Figuren, einem Werk, ich glaube von 2004, wenn ich mich nicht täusche, war das. Wie man später mal erfahren hat, Lerner war inspiriert von Kluge, überlegte kurz, dieses Werk seinem Mentor gewissermaßen zu schicken, fand das aber wahrscheinlich keine so tolle Geste und hat das gelassen. 10 Jahre später etwa hat Alexander Kluge dann die deutsche Übertragung, die deutsche Übersetzung gelesen, war begeistert vor allen Dingen von der Zeile "The sky stopped painting and turned into criticism". Ja? Also sie wandte sich der Kritik zu und so wäre das jetzt die perfekte Überleitung für Ben Lerner, den ich auf die Bühne bitte. Er kommt aus New York, er ist Autor, er ist also Romancier, Lyriker, er ist Kritiker, er ist auch Distinguished Professor in New York für englische Sprache und er wird uns jetzt von dem ABC singen. Ben Lerner.
I feel a little like the clown. Because I have no German, but Alexander Kluge always speaks to me in German, even knowing that I don't speak it, and thinks that I'll respond if I concentrate enough. I wrote this as a holiday card for Alexander, and knowing that I would be here with you. It's just called ABCs, and it starts with an epigraph from William Long's History of English Literature from 1909, which is describing Cadman, who's the first poet in English whose name we know. The epigraph reads as follows: "I cannot sing," Cadman answered, "and that is why I came hither from the feast. But he who spake unto him said, Sing the beginning of created things. Thereupon Cadman began to sing verses that he had never heard before, of this import: Now should we praise the power and wisdom of the Creator, the works of the Father. This is the sense but not the form of the hymn that Cadman sang while sleeping." The first song that I remember learning is the alphabet song, which is also known as the ABCs. I don't know if when you learn English in Germany, you learn this song. It's set to a melody that originates in an anonymous French pastoral song from the 18th century, but it became very famous because of Mozart's 12 variations. And the song Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, also one of the first songs an English-speaking child learns, is set to the same music. I only realized this 2 months ago when it was pointed out to me by my daughter's kindergarten teacher. And even though I can understand in the abstract that these are the same melodies, I cannot experience them as identical. It's as though the alphabet song is so fundamental that I'm unable to scrape the lyrics off the music in order to see that it's also the structure that underpins Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, and also Ba Ba Black Sheep. It's all the same melody. Trying to think the music independent of the alphabet lyrics is like trying to imagine pre-linguistic consciousness. My mind goes blank, goes quiet. The music is supposedly an aid to memory, but the mnemonic has fused with its object so thoroughly it induces a kind of forgetting of the melody as such. I almost certainly knew other songs well before the alphabet song, but in my recollection it is primary, singing it with my mother under the green glow-in-the-dark plastic stars I'd stuck to my bedroom ceiling. And I won't really sing the song, although Alexander always tries to get me to sing too in public, but it goes A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, you know that part. And then it goes, now I know my ABCs, next time won't you sing with me? The song is simple and profound. First you name the letters, and the names of the letters in English are the letters. After and Z, after all the letters have been activated, the singer is capable of arranging them into speech. Now I know my ABCs. Now that I have named the building blocks of expression, I am an I, the first person, the nominative singular pronoun. I wasn't an I until now. I am emerging from language. Next time, won't you sing with me? Now that I am I can open out to the social, imagine you, whoever you are, and the possibility that song might be shareable, communal. I can join the feast. This is what innumerable poems, maybe all poems, say. A language, a social world precedes me, forms me, and now I call out into it. Who can hear me, sing with me, perhaps transform it? In this song, the alphabet song, is the song of songs. The ritual song naturalizes the alphabet. It ensures that when I actually learn to write, to represent letters graphically, I will experience it as anamnesis. Alphabetization will feel like remembering because this technology of writing was pre-programmed by song. I will less acquire than recall the aid to memory writing is. The song will also make the order of the alphabet itself appear natural, immutable as the heavens. The song will emphasize the rhymes of the long E sounds, C, D, G, P, V, Z, both so I can memorize the letters and so their order will feel inevitable. But why is the English alphabet ordered as it is? Mere historical precedent. Unlike with numbers, there is no logical or essential sequence to the letters, and knowing alphabetical order does not help one read or write. The alphabet is the order of orders, pure convention that song transforms into social necessity. You cannot be a social singer until you recite the letters and the order your culture has ordained, and other orders are enforced by this one. A is for apple. We are taught the fruit of knowledge, the fall into time, into difference, into arbitrary signs. When I was a child at a small synagogue in Topeka, Kansas, they told us a story of a rabbi who comes upon a boy who is supposed to be praying. But instead of praying, the rabbi discovers the boy is reciting the Hebrew alphabet. The rabbi asks the child to account for himself, and he explains that since only God is capable of composing a prayer worthy of God, he's offering up the alphabet with the idea that God can use it to make the prayer that will suffice, that will transcend the limitations of the created and be worthy of the creator who preceded it. Only in a dream can Cadman find the worthy form. The first letter of Hebrew, a new old language, like a temple that has been rebuilt or a city reconstructed after an aerial bombing, is Aleph, and it makes no sound. Spinoza said Aleph is the sign of the beginning of sound in the throat that is heard by its opening. According to Daniel Heller-Rosen, Spinoza is still assigning it too much sound. Aleph guards the place of oblivion at the inception of every alphabet. It is a letter that stands for a sound everyone has always forgotten, must forget in order to speak, a sound only a god could make, a sound survived by its letter like a star survived by its light. Stars don't actually twinkle. What we experience as variations in their brightness is just perturbation in the medium. Twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are. Now I know my ABCs and can sing beneath them of created things. What precedes the alphabet, no eye can say. Thank you.
What a wonderful holiday card. You write such holiday cards to a lot of people?
Only to Kluge.
No, it's so wonderful because on the one side, the text is very simple and at the same time extremely complex, because there are several texts in the text. There are several layers in the text. What kind of genre is that? How would you say, what kind of genre is that?
Maybe that's why I called it a holiday card, because I wasn't sure what genre it was. I mean, it's a kind of series of parables.
Yes.
Yeah, and it's both very personal, but it's also about how socially formed the concept of personhood is, and that's something I think Kluge does.
Yeah, but also there is a kind of music part in it by the song itself, but there are also passages in the text which are very rhythmic, which are almost like a song, and then there are more reflexive passages in it, and then there's a rabbi text in it, so which is a kind of in-between situation. Kluge in your talks you had in Venice is referring to this world of angels as a world in between. What does this world in between means for you?
Yeah, I think the angel is a very complicated figure for Kluge and unites our work. I mean, I don't think it's incidental that Kluge's work is so shaped by the air war and the fact that he's so interested in the angel. You know, that the bomb is the worst secular substitute for the visitation of an angel, in a certain sense. But I also think it's about. I think it's about time. Like when an angel or a god appears to Cadman in the dream, in this founding dream of the origin of poetry, the reason why Cadman can perform in a dream for an angel or for a god, the text doesn't really specify which. The reason he can sing a song worthy of a god is because he can sing outside of time. God is outside of time, and to sing a song worthy of God, the problem is that your materials are finite, and one thing has to happen after the other. And so I think the angel in Kluge is also a figure for imagining a language that transcends the restrictions of mundane temporality, and that's kind of here too. But you know, the really interesting thing about the alphabet for me, thinking about it for this visit, is the aleph. It's the first mark in the alphabet. It's the unrepresentable thing that precedes the alphabet, and that's a domain for angels.
But at the same time, the alphabet is structuring life. It's segmenting life to some extent. Whereas in this world in between, the structures are getting destructed or implode even. In your novel on your Spanish experience, the protagonists use a lot of drugs. Is that important for you? Drugs?
Did you say drugs?
Drugs.
Oh yeah. I thought you said tracks.
No, drugs.
Are drugs important for me?
For this world
Yes.
in between, I mean, this counter world.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, yeah, I think that what really interests me about drugs and the representation of drugs that's in that book a lot is that there's a very contradictory discourse about what drugs do to our experience. Like on the one hand, we say they intensify experience, they intensify our experience of time, they make the real realer. And on the other hand, at the same time, we say they obliterate real experience. They distance us from experience. And I think there's a way in which that discourse about drugs, like they're good because they intensify experience, or they're bad because they rob you of real experience, is totally homologous to the way we talk about art and about reading. Like sometimes reading is represented as a really important experience because it intensifies presence, it puts you in touch with the now, and other times we talk about it as this thing that's a distraction from reality. And in terms of, but yeah, I mean, I think the capacity of the drug to confuse mundane temporal orders, or to scramble the degree to which you listen to literal versus connotative meanings. The amplification of ambiguity, I think, is common to drugs and also common to the arts that I care about.
So part of the major aspect of your text is how the experience of the alphabet song is really the basis of the way you construct the world in your writing, in your thinking, and so on. You think this basis is strong enough to be ready for the digital world?
Well, I mean, the ABC song, what I'm trying to do is think about how the ABC song is a primal linguistic scene for me. I remember it as first. But I'm also trying to think about the way that that's a false memory, and that in fact the alphabets that the culture goes out of its way to naturalize are arbitrary and subject to redescription. So it's not about, I mean, the piece kind of celebrates the power of the alphabet song, but in the service of remembering it, not as a natural order, but as a culturally enforced and totally arbitrary order. And I think that remembering the fact that the alphabet is a human technology and not a natural order is actually an important way to avoid the fetishization of new technologies, and instead think about the degree to which the dialectic of naturalization and denaturalization, and trying to get fresh eyes on the always already technological nature of sociality is actually like a useful, you know, as opposed to just lamenting that now we live in a technocracy, although of course there are different kinds of technologies.
I mean, on the other hand, the way you describe, so to say, to get initiated with the alphabet is also a way where you not just consciously, but really bodily grow up with this. And of course, these other languages coming from other sides don't have, on the first hand, this quality. So
well, and the pedagogic project around the alphabet is extreme and interesting. I mean, you learn as a kid that like alphabetical order is a totally arbitrary and kind of ridiculous way of organizing the world, right? It organizes things based upon the contingent fact that they have the same initial letter, but it maps everything. It becomes this Enlightenment order, and sometimes it's good to remember that that's one of many methods of organizing the world.
In your lyrics, you have strategies to implode this order, to destroy this order, to destruct this order?
Yeah, I mean, I also think, you know, you said that some of the passages in the writing are very rhythmic.
Yes.
Like you were talking earlier, a lot of the discussion for these events has been about binary code. Yeah. I mean, the binary code I know most intimately is like iambic pentameter, right? Unstressed, stressed, unstressed, stressed. Metrical, it's marked or it's unmarked. And I think that there's a way in which the many different kinds of codes that cross in poems, you know, when Lotman describes poetry as a system of systems, it's that what part of what poetry is as it is more than one kind of alphabet operating at the same time. And it emphasizes the degree to which there's more than one principle of order intersecting with another. And that can, I wouldn't say that it explodes the alphabet, but that it makes you conscious of order as such, and the plurality of orders, and that they're contestable, and that they can be brought into harmony or in a dissonant relation or whatever.
So I think now is the time to invite our other poet. She left? Oh, so we are really grateful that Cotten made it to Berlin, because I mean she is a Berliner, and she is not a Berliner, but she lives in Berlin normally. But at the moment she is in Los Angeles at the Aurora, Villa Aurora.
That's over. That's over.
It's over. It's over.
Back in
Okay,
Berlin, I guess.
so Cotten, it's good to have you back. I just mentioned that she got the several prizes, Klopstock Prize and Sploch Prize, just to mention a few. And I think it says enough when you see such a young woman that so many prizes are already on her side, in her pocket.
There's something wrong with society.
Okay, so thanks for being here, and I hope you
Thank you
entertain
for
us
the
now.
invitation. I'll sing of re-education. The piece is called Dad Jokes. And I too am harping about how many different ways there are to organize the world, and I tried to let other people feel my traumatic experience with trying to learn Japanese, but that's outside because it's too big a topic to bring to explain in a short piece. So I'll just dive in here that the foreign learner sees homonyms, which is an interesting particular phenomenon that I want to talk about. She looks in the dictionary and she sees, for example, Rekishi, history, and then she sees Rekishi being run over by a car, and she thinks, ooh, She thinks, she wonders what she wants to think. Maybe something funny. She's just some Joseph looking for a manger and would like to find the joke of all jokes. She likes the idea that deep in the generative transformation grammar of humanity lies a huge productive pun that originally brought forth us all. And that's, I suppose, rather a feminine thought. You get born as a girl and you keep thinking, no, this has to be a joke, that can't be serious. What is she looking for? That is probably what she will find. Just like Darwin, looking at animals he did not know well on faraway islands, saw the structures and not the animals. The network of overlap and wordplay that makes those familiar with the language sigh or wince shows to the foreigner some shadow of a skeleton structure that is less apparent to her in her own language. She has come in from somewhere else with all senses a-tremble and a structuralist idée fixe. And the pun-loather, whose discrimination I aspire to, is like, duh, what's so interesting about homonymy? And there is something about this me lying prostrate with this sensitivity and this idée fixe under the stern brow of the pun despiser that excites me. I have futile knowledge. Maybe also I am encouraged by the analogy to the world we live in, which has been carefully designed in the past years to ensure consumers can pass by the production sites and producers of their end products without noticing anything. So what is so interesting about homonymy? I can't quite explain if you don't feel the same boundless delight about the fact that the same sound means something completely different in a different context, something with no connection. I think that is extremely beautiful. The two words sounding alike is not the symptom of a connection, quite on the contrary, it shows how unconnected the spheres are in which they are formed. If there had ever been any likelihood of them being confused, they would have needed a disambiguation sign. Either that, or else speaking has to occur between people with the possibility of a short dialogue to clarify such little confusions. A dialogue that can create a moment of diplomatic warmth and cooperativity, like a chat about the weather with which language has in common that all users suffer from it together. It also reminds me of the ubiquity of people named Mohammed in some countries, or Lenas in others. This somewhat helpless repetition seemed to say names may not be as important as they seem. English has more synonyms and homonyms than German, and correspondingly, punning in English has the reputation of producing groans, while in German, Wortspiel is a fairly neutral word. In Japan, more even than in English, the old man's wordplay, or dad joke, the oyaji gyagu, based on one of the millions of puns waiting in the dictionaries for the gullible wit, is feared and dreaded like a fart. Yes, that was funny. Conversely, in daily life, there's a constant, rather pleasant atmosphere of cooperation in disambiguation and differentiation, even on TV. It is all in the spirit of the serious, not the Anglo and German, not true, jokes. The pleasant humor comes from a slight amusement about the way the world is so confoundable. Amusement like a springy bed without someone coming and jumping on it. Pleasure like looking at a beautiful picture without someone coming and explaining it. You get the idea. If you read Kobo Abe's The Woman in the Dunes, you will remember how the village works together to keep up the daily work of shoveling clear the sand holes in which the houses have been enveloped. And there is no escaping because it would be very ugly behavior to leave the others with this work. Similarly, endless collective maintenance work seems to be done in the language, the fine differentiations of the words eroding constantly into an ignorance that will become dangerous when it is too late. Like the dune, language is of immense scale and superhuman beauty. We live in a complex world where things easily can be confused or ignored. We must work together to make it a coherent place to live in. What an opposition lies in this feeling of what language is, contrasted to the anagrammatic square-dancing virtuosity cultivated in a poetic sphere when the unusual, das Neue, gains points simply for being new, and this single leftover criterium has become inflationary. Where for some reason people seem to be bored with subtle and acute use of truth and sense, because their world has become so reduced, so that the goal, even when considered, has become to confuse or impress any reader, taking the brain on wild rides between sound, meaning, and space, which is trippy, which may also leave you alone, shivering, a useless person on a trampled garden, once the electricity for the music of the special has gone. Something interesting happens for literature when language is already so rich. A little bit in English already, but even more so in Chinese and Japanese, when wordplay, the bizarrely networked, crass poetry, is done automatically by the language already. The point of good literature becomes a matter of taste in choosing which sonic, poetic connections to amplify with each other. To what point? If to Japanese or Chinese poets, if I'm speaking only from my meager experience, the emphasis on freedom in poorer languages, poetics, can be enticing for a sweet moment of freedom from the weight of their brocade language. I also feel with them a certain distress about how to bury their fine sense of taste, which depends on the situation. So there is no absolutely whatever. Beside Chinese and Japanese literature, Europe's celebration of liberation from quite unnecessary stupid constraints seems clunky and medieval. There have also always been quiet, rich local cultures here too, mossy growths of habits, mythologies, jokes, styles, but these regional phenomena have been traditionally excluded from the world of the written word, much to its impoverishment. First, the Catholic Church killed the local spirits with the cross. Then Protestantism killed off the ones that were still hiding in the guise of saints. We have been educated in a cultural monoculture, monotheism, desert. The European notion of individuality also suffers from the colonial history, which is characterized by a habit of universalizing the speaker's own smallness. We measure the universe by multiplying our small scope, Europe being, for example, at least 10 times smaller on the map than in our heads. I'm speaking from my own meager experience. And always imagine the universe much too small also. Only in such a shrunken universe could one hang one's ambition on being unique. Cultures with a better mathematical imagery or intuition, with better music also that helps school the mind, because we have nothing better than Mozart. Although I love him, he and Bach are not exactly gamelan polyphony. Many cultures on this earth, and often the smaller ones, know without having to think twice that the universe is not just infinite, but infinite times infinite. The difference lies in the knowledge that there are endless versions of myself out there, and therefore I am banal. And being friendly with this existential feeling, it is not tragic, it is direttum. It simply means to participate in an endless melody that is as long and wide as nature. And this is definitely not one God with any kind of facial hair, but it is also not an abstract idea of unity. My experience is more like there are concentrations of specificity in particular nooks all over the place, local spirits, ghosts, the like, all explainable with quantum theory, if one could only follow it, but which may have a perfectly mathematical quark-like tendency to elude explanation. There is, if you ask me, no canon, no one holy word, except maybe the hydrogen molecule. Even the hydrogen molecule is only the illusion of a dragon carried by 100 atoms in black stage suits. Water, after all, only begins to be watery when there is a huge repetition of molecules. So my intuition has doubts in the perspicuity of projecting a narration of growth in analogy to animals' cell division onto the whole universe. Even if there was something like an explosion, things are merely condensed differently, distributed over the expanse of possibility and time differently, and the like. Of course, to gain understanding of a reality one is unimportant in is to lose one's grip on things one believed to own and control, as the analytic philosophers say, to hold a belief, a very diplomatic formulation, and thus has spent one's whole life stilting and confining them in order to create this illusion of control, or of what we call understanding, perhaps. The fact of infinite infinities also changes the focus on individuality. I can yearn to be an exception, or I can feel how interesting and readable one is as a recombination of elements. Other people are fascinating, and I can relate to them because they are recombinations of the same elements and patterns I also am a version of. This is a linguistic cosmology and shifts the focus from being ununderstood to being understandable. An essential point for a poet. For example, in Buddhist mythology, there's the image of Indra's net, where dewdrops hang at the intersections of an endless web, each drop reflecting all other drops. The drops mirroring each other are at the same time the same and different already by being identical, but with a position shifted by one. My identity, therefore, is not anything that I own, but only consists in my position on a map, so to say. And I would be myself someplace else if I were someplace else. So I'm just reproducible, and I echo all other things, and there is nothing else of which my identity could consist. So the whole universe applies to each of us and thus unites us, cradles us in its infinite variety that is not stuck to any individual being. We can slip around in this network insofar as we are reading heads, or little ribosomes of making sense, hiccuping, usually harmless sources of reproduction and error. This soothing image liberates me from the stress of deciding with my own little limited knowledge whether I respect or disrespect all those other things out there, as if I were some kind of judge. I no longer have to, with my own mental muscle, heave and import every new bit of information into my bag of world knowledge and set it down in the card registry system with the right connections. The world is out there, and anything new I encounter is sure to echo in some way. And that's how I can not understand it, maybe, but use it, or it use me. That's never quite clear what is going on. I can also keep my thoughts to myself if I'm not engaged as a talker, thanks to the fact that they are just incomplete echoes of the universe and not unique little embryos that will wither and die if not carried into the world and coded onto paper. I don't have to acquire and stake a claim to and bang copyright on all things that exist on Earth in order to have a place there. I am connected from birth and need only discover. And the discovery also, thank God, does not fill up my consciousness with, for example, kanji like my useless vocabulary notebooks. But my perception of the universe just doesn't grow, but grows more differentiated as I learn from the endlessly repetitive society that flows through my movements and that can't help being varied. I am the Mohammed of this house, the young Mohammed, the old Mohammed, Mohammed the mother, the sister, the brother, the father, the mother's brother, etc. Just like I will mean so many things in the course of life. I realize I've made a mistake in that I've allowed a monotheism to sneak into my text now. But I am only looking at the diversity of the Mohammeds and not, the sameness of the, probably it's all one. I just like a lot of gods better. They're different, they're not one. I'm skipping a little bit, that's why So when I have no meaning as I walk down the street as a foreigner, it can be as nice as sleep and also as sad as dying. My meaning lies only in my connections with other things, so in my capacity as a mirror of the language that lives in hosts like myself. Back to language. Kanji must be learned in context if one doesn't want to sink into the quicksand of onyomi and kunyomi like a sable-toothed tiger in a tar swamp. Japanese, like English, is a language in which instead of making the words carry around little signs to mark gender, case, and number, these things are left to context and word order, making for us mostly to context. A smooth flow goes on and less acrobatic self-defining among the words. The sense of a word is not a Frankenstein of fragments of meaning collected over time by a speaker in little word boxes, but more like the movement in use that may surround a tool as a kind of aura, or like the meaning of musical chords, seasons, or paths, conjured up by dynamic context, the postures and movements of the words toward each other, among one another. Meaning only emerges when several words come together, like a chatty atmosphere or an electrical current, and disappears again when the words are isolated. And thus it does not happen quite so easily that someone forces words on others or forces words to do something paradox. On the other hand, people may be forced to fake one half of the conventional cooperative conversation in such situations, which can be more painful than waiting for a mansplainer to finish while one checks one's email on one's phone. Or like in the USA, I was warned not to force people in dependent situations like students or service personnel to laugh at my jokes. And I feel the pain in this very moment, like a sad stand-up comedian at an open mic taking 5 minutes revenge on his audience. In Japan, a certain pathos surrounds the traditional practice of 2 or more people alternating blows with a pestle or hammer, rhythmicizing and collectivizing tedious work. If one of them goes independent, serious injuries may ensue. But the same rhythms can also be found in good comedy. While like here, the bourgeois politely and formally wait for each individual person to finish whatever bullshit they feel they need to say. So thank you, thank you. I do have a little bit more. Similar fast codependent techniques can be found in the polyrhythms of West Africa's or Indonesian's gamelan music I mentioned before. I meant to say that it is also language's way, unlike systems like biblical rhetoric or French post-structuralist theory that in their linear hypnosis seem to derive from competitive ball games with the goal of preventing the opponent from getting an opportunity for action. It seems tastelessly recklessly blind to behave that way in many cultures and subcultures of this world. If you look, for example, at chat etiquette, and then again, I suppose that depends. In some places, it seems to be the fashion to send off tiny bites of chat over a while so that the phone of the receiver keeps pinging merrily. Other people prefer that one formulate what one has to say and say it in one go, forfeiting, of course, the possibility of a slow and gentle fade-in of an idea with feedback from the other. This need for constant feedback has been marked as a behavior trait of young females in the wake of Valley Girl talk or high-rising terminals, but it is also a rhythmic feature of hip-hop intros, cowboy grunts, and other situations where it seems appropriate to get in the groove before one unpacks one's preconceived thoughts. And it is an art. So the good habits of some oral cultures have been terrorized and endangered by the written culture that has been so automatically seen as somehow more highly developed. But my rant in this place can serve only to offer the alphabeticized tribes some helpful advice for survival, which I'm still not sure if it's a good idea, but maybe I've coded it in so that it only reaches some. The 2 models remain significant for the tragedy of class history, which is something for all of us. There are those who instinctively feel the need to create some kind of harmony or harmony in fight culture or whatever in any room they enter, some kind of micro-justice in the atmosphere. We could call them the mothers or the long-term non-annoying co-workers, and there are others who come into a space and are led by their instincts to try to dominate it by a subterfuge or by brute force of voice space, and who often don't even notice how silly they are because the working force is so polite. And in my job, I'm never quite sure where I might belong. My academic point, to totally wrap it up, is that the model of communication, sender, receiver, topic, or denoted, denoting, the way we learned it at university, is not universal. One-way communication is not done equally much in all cultures and countries, and that is one of the reasons some countries came to be the colonized. They were being too polite, too cooperative in their conversation style. The one-sided communication form of written culture has taken over the world and secured it for industrial scale harassment and destruction, so fuck the alphabet.
To some extent, you used it for your text, the alphabet.
Mostly, yeah, almost except for 2 words.
I think I would like to start with a comparison really between style and content, perhaps between your both texts. Maybe I completely misinterpret them now, but my impression was, on the surface, your text was a collage form of text. But at the same time, you question yourself, is there behind a kind of monotheism? Whereas in Ben Lerner's text, I said already, it's quite a linear text on the surface, but with kind of very interesting inserts, which are let the reader counter-read the linearity of the text. So would you agree to this relationship, or doesn't?
Does it matter?
Yeah, because I would say because forms matter.
We
But
saw
you
what
can,
happened,
of
right?
course, right away say it doesn't matter at all.
I probably would use other words if I were
Okay, please.
forced to describe it.
Okay, please.
But
do.
fortunately, I'm not forced to describe what I just did, I think.
How could I force you? No. And what about you, Ben?
I have a question. Is it true that that puns are called? Did I understand that puns are called dad jokes?
Dad jokes, I think, is an English word.
But dad jokes in English doesn't just mean. I mean, I think you're right that puns like are kind of dad jokes. That's just an interesting genre to me. The dad
it's a subgenre of puns. One subgenre is maybe dad, or it has some common space. I encountered the word actually first when I was reading about Oyaji Gago, which actually means old man gag.
Yeah. It's just interesting to me that's gendered. Yeah. I don't know. I don't know if one of ours is more linear than the other. But I feel like our attitude. I mean, I feel like on the surface. I mean, I would just point out that in very different tone. I mean, fuck the alphabet. I also say fuck the alphabet in my piece, but in a different way, which is to say, fuck the idea that the alphabet is a natural order and the only available order. I mean, it seems to me that both pieces are designed to remind us of the provisionality of those orders, despite their whatever else we're saying.
If you do that, I mean, there's an intrinsic antagonism built in, because being a poet or writer, you at the same time use it. So you are constantly in this antagonism of using it and contradicting it in a way. That way?
I guess what I'm interested in is kind of a poetics of, well, re-education, as I said, or of exoticism in other senses than the Edward Said. Of course, there's a lot of negative aspects of exotic, but if we want to change, if there's a pretty desperate need to reduce a lot of the damage that colonialism has done, then the question is sort of how to do that, how to make new habits, and how to maybe coerce or trick people in certain places, and I partake in these spaces, and so I'm doing experiments on myself basically of how it is to, for example, to generate like a value or an enthusiasm for not what I find when I look for the origin, but what I find when I look for something different, or for other versions, or like when I'm in love with the other and not in love with my own childhood or something.
I also kind of say, I mean, because you're saying that we use the alphabet. I mean, we use the letters, but that's not the same thing as the I mean, the alphabet is such an interesting, it's like a pedagogic, like when you don't even read the alphabet, you recite the components of a certain order. So like writing is using letters, it's using language. The alphabet is an abstraction from the way language is used that's designed to enforce a certain kind of order. And in the American context, like in the 19th century, it was a very gendered domestic order where women were supposed to instruct the children in the alphabet so that they would be good citizens. And there were all these other messages encoded in learning that order. So there's actually, I think, the degree to which one uses the alphabet by writing is kind of an open question. You use the letters.
Yeah, you use the letters, but what is interesting is that in Ann Cotten's case, she is interested in Japanese, for example, which uses evidently a different kind of script. So the question would be, is this script, which is in our language is Latin alphabet, does that influence the way you construct the word?
Absolutely, and that's one of the reasons I'm interested in. For example, if you look at the history of the written word in China and Japan, I'm saying it together, it's a complex and huge history. But in many countries, writing was a matter of the elite for a long time, and then at a certain point there was a movement for popular alphabetization. And depending on what kind of writing, what kind of language situation the area had, this is quite a different story. And so, for example, in Japan, they imported the Chinese writing system, which is complex and it's a matter for specialists. You can spend your whole life studying the kanji and you will never be finished, especially in the old system when it was not yet normed. It was after the Second World War when there was a canon of 2,000 basic science agreed upon. Before that, there were some conventions, but there was an endless number of characters you could learn. And then, beside that, there was a phonetic writing also. They also have an alphabet song, by the way, called Iroha, and it's also used as an ordering device. I wouldn't necessarily...
How many letters does this have?
I think it's like 64 or something. It's got... because they use a syllabic writing, so they have the pure vowels, and then they have combinations, what we would call combinations of consonants and vowels, whereas when we recite the alphabet, we always have to add some random vowel in order to be able to properly say it, otherwise you have to say and it's hard to disambiguate. So it's quite an elegant system, actually, but it just draws the borders in different places. And so for me, it's incredibly interesting to learn a system that has a different organization system, and that also is equally original and archetypic in a different place. And so I have a live desire to let myself be reprogrammed, but obviously reprogramming is not the same as when you learn it as a child, sadly.
So could you imagine that you challenge your alphabet, not just the words, by another alphabet, and that will transform your writing?
I don't know. I don't know if I can learn. I mean, I speak Spanish, and I often forget the Spanish alphabet. My daughters are Spanish. We have a bilingual household, and they find it hilarious that I forget the alphabet. Like, you can be a fluent speaker and writer in a language with forgetting the names and the order of the letters. So that fact to me is kind of astounding, since the alphabet we think of is so central. I don't know. This is not an answer, but I was just when I was in Cuba, I became friends with this taxi driver who the Soviets had trained to speak Esperanto as part of an educational project where he was going to teach everyone Esperanto. But then the program got cut, and he's the only one he knows who speaks Esperanto. And I just was thinking, as Anne was talking about when she was giving her talk about this guy in Cuba, like the loneliest man in the world, who's the only speaker he knows of a universal language. I don't know what the implications are of that, but I remember him reciting the Esperanto alphabet to me. I don't know. I don't think it's like the alphabet's good or the alphabet's bad. We all have alphabets. I think remembering the arbitrary nature of the alphabet as a technology and the mystery of the fact that such influential technologies are historically determined, and remembering that it's historical precedent and not an essential relationship is a useful. I don't know. It's a useful way of resisting a kind of metaphysics of language that can be part of a kind of nostalgia.
But now we are in a situation where another alphabet, the digital, is more and more intervening in our realities. And of course, you as writers, as poets, are using the alphabet to construct words. So now you have a new word producer coming in by the digital, simulating different kinds of words. How does this process affect you as a writer, as a poet?
I'm not sure how far this metaphor can carry of the computer technology inventing a new alphabet. I mean, it works with 0 and 1, but it is usually, unfortunately, based on human sort of visions of world organization. And that might be interesting to examine, like in the tradition of Lakoff and Johnson, how we map essential or very central metaphors of our world orientation, like up, down, abstract, concrete. It's all very cross-oriented in Western society, and I'm interested in how else it could be, and also how computers can maybe there would be immense potential to reorganize the world, and I think it's not happening because unfortunately humans build computers, so they're surprisingly unstrange. But sometimes they give us caricatures of our own thinking that drive us wild. So the passwords are security mindedness that can really kick us in the leg 20 times a day.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think I'm thinking about what like Anne was talking about, the alphabets being kind of elite technologies. Like there's the binary stuff and there's the incredible, frightening and sometimes beautiful power of computers, but we're also surrounded all the time by vocabularies and alphabets that don't have a lot of inherent value but belong to a new kind of priestly class, like the language of finance. Like most people you talk to about finance, like if you ask them what derivatives are, maybe they have a language, they have a vocabulary, but they can't really explain it. Like it's an elite vocabulary that's restricted to a priestly class. And then every time there's a crash and it's like maybe we should have new people in charge of the economy, they say no, we're the only ones who understand the language. So I mean the digital is immensely powerful. It can be great in great ways and horrible. But I actually think in a way the more exigent question about language right now is how there are all these things that are related to technological power, like the speed of nano trading or whatever, that are actually just protecting exclusive vocabularies that have no inherent value except that they secure a domain of elite behavior. Do you know what I mean?
I have a last question. Do you write your poems in a handwriting or directly in the computer?
I use a computer because it looks the spacing, it doesn't, I imagine the poems ending up on a printed page, and the translation from when I write by hand to the page, it's too different.
What about you?
I was just going to say, I just wanted to say, Ben, that your definition of value is just excellent. I just want to repeat it. Value is usefulness in defending. Well, how did you say?
I have no idea.
The very last thing is something had no inherent value for defending someone's possessions or something. Well, the people who have the most power want things to stay exactly as they are, so that's sort of the natural dynamics of conservatism, and anything that serves to reinforce these values or to bestätige, or to confirm them, is seen as of value. That's how our culture, that's how we've learned what culture is, I think.
Okay, now we come to our last part. Philipp Ekardt is a media theorist. He wrote a major work on Kluge, just published and came out as a book. And he is going to speak about film as in the analog and the digital, so to say, the transformation of the digital and the analog related to film, what that means.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for sticking around. It's quite late. I don't think I've given a talk that late ever, save for maybe for one or two occasions where I came from Europe, flew to the States, gave a talk, and it was very late on European time, but everybody else was on their regular schedule. So it's very much appreciated. I have about 20 minutes, I think, and I also don't really have a title for what I'm going to do. I have the text, though, and I think it's moving in a direction where I'm trying to think, and it's something that keeps coming back to me when I'm trying to make sense of the digital. And by the way, I should say, it's very kind of you to introduce me as a media theorist, and there's a lot of thinking about media in the Kluge book, but there are other people who are way more qualified. But I work on practices, artistic, visual, literary practices, and I think a lot about what media are in relation to them. And that relates to what I'm trying to do tonight in part, is I'm trying to think about the digital and the HKWs and Alexander Kluge's suggestion to connect it to this idea of alphabetization, which I think has its ultimate vantage point, and there's a kind of a subcurrent going through your conversation here in a model for what is a sign, and that's a discrete sign, as in a letter and a number are discrete signs, and there are other types of manifestation which are maybe signs which are not discrete. And if you're dealing with film, that question becomes pertinent immediately, in particular if you're talking about the analog-digital transformation. But what I'm actually trying to do is I'm trying to think about the digital in relation to tropes, I think. So we're moving from the alphabet to rhetoric, ultimately, I think. I'll work with 3 pieces of material. One text and 2 clips, more exactly 3 clips, but 2 of them derived from the same source. And the text is a very short story by Kluge himself, and I'll only get to it by the very end of this presentation, so please bear with me. And I think there's a way of trying to understand what I'm going to talk about before that as a reading of that story, and maybe it will become clear in the end, maybe not. The material I'm going to start out with now was made for a project that was organized by Kluge. And could we have the first clip now?
Soweit wir es beurteilen können, ist dieses Bild gänzlich frei von spezifischen Objekten. Zumindest sind sie nicht sichtbar, also entweder mikroskopisch klein oder zu weit entfernt, um mit fotografischen Möglichkeiten zu dieser Tageszeit abbildbar zu sein. Und doch sehen wir etwas, und zwar den Himmel. Streng genommen ist das kein geografischer Begriff. Der Himmel ist kein konkreter Ort, auch kein Objekt. Und dennoch sehen wir ihn und wir wissen, wo er ist, nämlich stets über uns. Woraus besteht der Himmel? Man könnte sagen, aus dem Universum. Aber lassen wir das fürs Erste. Wenden wir uns den greifbaren Dingen zu. Wir sind in der Stadt, auf der Straße, da ist ein Haus, eine Fassade. In einer Redewendung könnte man sagen, ein Tag wie jeder andere, ein Ort wie jeder andere. Eine weibliche Person ist in Eile. Moment bitte. Augenblick. Was sehen wir? Eine Ordnung, eine Anordnung von Dingen, Materialien, Stoffen. Dazwischen ein Mensch. Zu dem Mensch gehört eine Geschichte, die wir hier nicht erzählen werden können. Hinter den Mauern wahrscheinlich noch mehr Menschen. Und hinter den Dingen, hinter jedem einzelnen von ihnen, noch mehr Menschen, noch mehr Geschichte. Die Textilindustrie ist einer der ältesten und nach Zahl der Beschäftigten und Umsatz einer der wichtigsten Wirtschaftszweige des produzierenden Gewerbes. Ein Rock ist einröhrig und umschließt von der Hüfte an abwärts beide Beine gleichzeitig, während die Hose für jedes Bein extra eine Röhre bildet. Anhand verschiedener anatomischer Untersuchungen von altsteinzeitlichen Fuß- und Beinskeletten entstand die Theorie, dass Menschen bereits vor 40.000 Jahren Schuhe kannten. Handtaschen waren im Mittelalter ein aus Leder am Gürtel befestigtes Accessoire für Männer. Später wechselte das modische Nutzobjekt zum weiblichen Utensil. Als Taschen mit
So my first exemplar is an excerpt from a short 12-minute-long film produced by German director Tom Tykwer titled Der Mensch im Ding, The Man or the Human in the Thing, as a contribution to Alexander Klug's first genuine digital DVD project, the 2008 3-disc encompassing news from ideological antiquity, a 9-hour investigation centered around Soviet director Sergei Eisenstein's unrealized attempt at making a film version of Marx's Das Kapital, which is comprised of interviews, visual and textual montage sequences, film clips old and new, as well as a separate set of stories that come as PDFs. Tykwer's piece occupies a special place here in that in its making, beyond the piece's digital manifestation, still lies a production apparatus which, Kluge's subtitle of the DVD project suggests as much, we now find ancient and even antique. The material and social assemblage of the old movie studio, where it was initially filmed on 35mm. Tykwer's piece was initially filmed in an actual movie studio. Speaking about this clip, Kluge has emphasized this quality. The piece is situated at the suture, at the Nahtstelle is his original German, between classical cinema and electronic cinema. A moment of historical discontinuity, yet mediation, which, while no longer immediately materially present in the visual material, all previous analog information has been converted to digital, is strategically and procedurally rearticulated. Tykwer here employs first the oral gesture of the director's commenting voiceover, and this is an instance of non-diegetic orality. It is here turned into a vocal diegesis, a pointing action, pointing out items within the image, narratively supplying the depicted entities with brief commentaries. We could think of them acoustic post-it notes, as in you see the handbag and he tells you something about handbags. We see the skirt, he tells you something about skirts. Or in German, he says Rock. And the histories of their production. And I think it would be instructive to look at where these notes, post-it notes, come from. For instance, the brief passage that you heard about the textile industry as a producing genre, when I tried to research it, aka Google it, I entered a few search terms. It is simply the first sentence of the German Wikipedia entry for textile industry that is being quoted and being spoken through that directorial signature voice while you see that digital rendering of a formerly analog filmed skirt. This gesture not only harks back to Kluge's work as a filmmaker and its uses of the voiceover, we could think of the merely orally present, partial narrating instance of his 1978 film The Patriot, which is a knee, a joint, a literary quotation from a poem by Morgenstern, from which said film is literally articulated. So in The Patriot, you hear Kluge's voice, and he speaks as that knee, and the knee narrates that film. Tykwer here also mentions in the direction of Kluge's fellow author Jean-Luc Godard, whose ruminating comments in Histoire du cinéma, originally produced for television, both contemplated and perversely rejoiced in the vanishing of material film, celluloid, into the realm of electronic images, such as video. Tykwer combines such strategies, still inherited from what could be called classical cinema, with the visual deployment of electronic means. The digital image here enables a strange quasi-spatiality. It is, let's keep that in mind, not a space, in which movements, quote-unquote, through the image perform a strangely ambling, tilting, slightly nauseous or nauseating exploratory choreography. The point is one of resemblance or reminiscence. Media historically erstwhile, these would have been camera movements, either mechanically facilitated, dollies, pans, tracks, swerves, or such visual trajectories would have been the effect of manipulations of the system of lenses. There would have been zooms, for instance. This is here no longer the case. The vectors deployed in Tikva's clip, while still emulating a mode of image generation that was the result of kinetic or optical movements through space, is actually the result of informational processes. So this looks like, or kind of like a mimicking of physical movement, but it's actually purely informational, digital, from which emerges a zone provisionally figured as a space of the digital image in which the clip seeks to orient the viewer. In this regards, Tikva's small exercise, and it's really more of a sketch, obviously, than a fully developed project, Tikva's small exercise can perhaps be captured in terms suggested by film theorist Laura Mulvey, who calls both the panorama of current electronic devices, that is digital technology, as well as the spectatorial practices it enables, delayed cinema, marking a state in which the images, still derived from a formerly analog setup, can now be halted, reconsidered, or reviewed, just as Tikva turns a formerly filmic image into an object of reconsideration and study. And yet, the limits of such digital consideration are no less evident. In Tikva's clip, which through its particular poetics and the deployment of visual maneuvers sets up film historical signposts that direct the viewer into the pre-digital age, an analog stratum and its productions which now appear in a paradoxical invisibility. And I would now like to you to show the two subsequent clips, sound off, and then return to my presentation. The following one. So considering these two brief excerpts from Dziga Vertov's 1929 Man with a Movie Camera, a historically preceding dispositive, aesthetic, and regime are now juxtaposed with the digital. Tikva positions his clues precisely. So I think there are a set of clues in Tikva's text that points you to that film, intentionally or not. Whether he intended it or not, I don't know, but the relation is clear. The arrested image calls up the film historical milestone of Vertov sending the flight of a horse-drawn carriage to a halt, to then initiate a sequence of alternating still and moving moments in which the camera or film itself switches between the static individual frame and its animation, the cinematic discharge of movement, and the site and arrangement that enabled this construction, the editing table. In the second, very brief sequence, which I just showed, Vertov then again through montage produces a pictorial, representational, and conceptual surplus by establishing the activity of editing and the technique of suing as two poles of a filmic equivocation. In this one instance, there are many more in Man with a Movie Camera. Film is needled together just as a seamstress sews a garment. Said equivocation between editing and suing is in turn evoked in Tykwer's clip, but as the far part of a techno-historical bridge, which in the moment of its crossing might turn out to have burned already. The medium for this historical probing is the first visual object orally indexed through Tykwer's voice, the skirt, the German Rock. And I should say that if you're hearing that in German Rock, in kind of antiquated German Rock could also mean a coat. And there's a famous passage in Marx where Marx thinks about the commodity, and he says, der Rock ist der Wertträger, so there's a backstory to that too, which I can't go into at this point, partly because I don't have the tools yet, but I'm pretty much convinced that there's something going on behind that. So the skirt to be followed by a comparison with a set of pants, shoes, and a handbag. Targeting two moments in Man with a Movie Camera, the halted carriage from which pops open the space of the editing room, and the intercut of editing and suing, we now see what we don't see and can't yet see in the digital, and where one of the problems of orientation in the 21st century may lie, as suggested through and as this historical relationality. We are still developing the repertoire of maneuvers from which the image of a materially and historically informed account of our digital production and our digital present could emerge. Our movements are still as wobbly and shaky as the awkward tilts and slides through the digital info mock-up of a formerly analog image space that Tykwer's clip performs. For this was, of course, also one of the central tenets of Vertov's work, as the late Annette Michelson, eminent figure in film scholarship, as the late Annette Michelson in one of her sharply discerning analysis laid out. Vertov's point not simply consisted in finding a method for cinematically articulating the material conditions of production from which film emerged, the basis of the filmic image, if you wish. Vertov also produced an image of production, as it was at that moment. The crucial term here was montage. Montage was what made the film, but the film also gave you images for what making was. Or to put it differently, for what production was. It is this task that is still being sorted out at our current moment with regards to the digital in its historical dimension. For the digital, or to be more precise, digitization, not only marks a fundamental transformation of media technological basis, digitization also implies a crisis in representation. And that crisis isn't of apocalyptic dimensions, but a crisis it is. And one of its first and foremost objects consists in the nexus between said base and the representations it enables. That is, how does one show the digital? How does one show informational, that is, digital production, and not just showing its products? The basic premise of the HKW's overall programming block, the new alphabet, and also to a certain extent today's, that is Alexander Kluge's specific programming, relies on an equivalence between the very old processes of alphabetization and the very recent deployment of algorithmic forces. So the concept of algorithms is way older, but kind of we're talking about that onslaught that we're facing at the moment. Both, as philosopher Sibylle Krämer argues, rely on discrete signs, letters and numbers. While alphabetization, as Rosemarie Tietze has spoken to in an earlier section of this panel, was a crucial tenet in Soviet Russia, Vertov's contribution operated differently. Bracketing his contemporary Eisenstein's elaborate attempts at thinking together the practice of film, in particular as a montage practice, and the linguistic realm, so there's a lot of that in Eisenstein, Vertov isn't doing it, but I think there's a different value in Vertov that speaks to us today in our current situation. We could best describe Vertov's operation by which filmic editing and suing are set into relation as equivalent to a figure, and I mean a linguistic figure, a figure of speech, a rhetorical figure. This is figurative filmmaking. Its linguistic purview lies in the field of rhetoric. It is a trope. It is a figure that generates meaning by way of substitution, and that is one of the meanings of that concept of a trope. It's a specific rhetorical or linguistic figure that functions through substitution. One replaces the other, and in that transition you generate a specific type of meaning. And in that older dispositive, it would have been the connection of, say, suing and editing, for instance. That would be a trope. On other occasions, I have found myself pondering this perspective and with a similar historical temporal axis in mind as the one that connects and separates Tykwer and Werthof, here understood as placeholders of the analog and the digital. And should I underline that it is Kluge's overall production which in the present context facilitates and even generates such distant probings, moments and movements of orientation. Pondering the peculiar divergence that we encounter in digital works in which the articulation of a base or mediality as its fundament or as the fundaments for its existence encounters a very different set of challenges than its analog predecessors. Looking at the model of the alphabet, I'm tempted to think of the algorithm more as an equivalent to linguistic operativity that we find partly described in rhetorical treatises and theories. Maybe algorithmic operativity is really more akin to the linguistic operativity of tropes. The processes by which meaning is generated through the sheer, dumb, and smooth transitions from linguistic component to component. You don't need to read de Man's seminal essay, Anthropomorphism and Trope in the Lyric, although I'd still recommend it, to realize that nobody ever successfully attempted to show tropes in the manner in which, for instance, the disjunctive montage poetics of Werthof could still more or less credibly claim to have at least articulated the material base of film and as production. Maybe the digital edit is not like suing. Maybe it is more like the topological shift from one element to another. Or maybe one strange form of suing are topological connections. And maybe this model for the digital in itself relies on the construction of a historical constellational image, one half settled in the analog, filmically vanishing, the other in our digital present. I would like to end with a promised brief story which appeared in German in Kluge's 2015 Kong's große Stunde Chronik des Zusammenhangs, The Great Hour of Kong, Chronicle of Connections, which was partly translated on the occasion of his Venice show, on which he also collaborated with Bernd Lerner, and primarily for the actual exhibition with Thomas Demand and Anna Fiebrock. And it was titled The Boat is Leaking, the Captain Lied. I'm not entirely sure, but I believe that specific story was not translated, so you'll have to take my translation now for it. And I didn't translate for style, it's just to get the quote-unquote meaning across. Hermann Patzinger writes that the needle was a path-breaking invention. He adds a development which in hindsight might seem extremely abrupt, still requires 1,000 years. This is confirmed by the newest finds in the case of Idaho, which show that the needle was invented 70 times, to be forgotten and invented again. Then, in hindsight, quote-unquote, unexpectedly, the new technology spreads through the expanses of vast territories. With bone needles, animal furs could be firmly tied together. Clothing, and we could think of the skirt, or of the woman sewing in Werthof's films here, clothing was no longer floppy when the cold arrived. The needle in the mind ties sentences and the reports of generations to each other. A process of remodeling, Umbau, is taking place in the brain. Thank you.